Okay, thanks, Judith. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. And welcome to the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection's stakeholder meeting for New Jersey Administrative Code Title 7, Chapter 36, Subchapters 25 and 26. This is dealing with the post-Green Acres funding compliance requirements for local parkland. And this meeting was advertised for members of the public, but we also welcome our local government partners as well as our nonprofit partners. So this is kind of a free-for-all, anybody can join. And it's for the new rulemaking we're working on in the Office of Transactions and Public Land Administration, or OTPLA for short, OTPLA. And today is January 26th, 2023. And this meeting will take place between 1 p.m. and 3 p.m., but we're going to be available if folks want to continue talking till 4, but I think we'll see how many we get on the call, depending on how long we'll stay past 3. So 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. And my name is Caroline Keefe, and I'm the Regulatory Officer in the Public Land Compliance section of the Office of Transactions and Public Land Administration. And I'm going to help out as your moderator today. And before we begin, I'll review a disclaimer. The information presented during this meeting is intended to facilitate discussion on various existing and potential regulatory mechanisms. No final agency decision regarding this information is expressed or implied. And just a reminder that this meeting is being recorded. And it looks like we have a few more folks joined in. So for attendance, we ask for those that are attending via the Teams link to please enter your first and last name and affiliation in the chat box. And if you're calling in or don't have access to the chat box, if you could please email your name, phone number, and affiliation to our email address at otpla@dep.nj.gov. And that's how we're going to keep track of attendance. Okay, similar to our other stakeholder meetings, just to review the speaking guidelines and etiquette. During the meeting, please make sure your microphone is muted and your camera is turned off. And to request the opportunity to respond or ask a question, please enter your name and affiliation in the chat box. For those of you who don't have access, we're going to be taking to the chat box. We'll take some breaks throughout the meeting. And if we don't have too many, that shouldn't be a problem. When called on to speak, you may unmute yourself. And if you'd like, turn on your camera. And when you have finished speaking, please remute yourself and turn off your camera. And just a reminder that those who don't have access to the chat, they can use the raised hand, or we'll be taking breaks as well to make sure everyone who doesn't have access to the chat gets a chance to speak. And this looks like a small group again, but for our larger groups, we started allotting 3 minutes per speaker. It looks like we probably won't have to stick to that tight time frame for this meeting. It looks pretty small group today. For technical problems, please either ask for assistance in the chat or send an email to our email address, otpla@dep.nj.gov. And just a reminder that all are welcome to submit written comments and questions to the rulemaking team at that same email address, otpla@dep.nj.gov. And please include rulemaking in the subject line. And just a big thank you to those who have submitted comments written or via oral during attendance at the meetings. It's been very productive and we appreciate the feedback. Okay, at this time, I'd like to introduce Judith N.J.A.C. She's the Assistant Director in the Office of Transactions and Public Land Administration. And Judith, I yield the floor to you.
Thank you, Caroline. So some of you may know that we had a reorganization almost a year ago at this point. Until that time, Nancy Lawrence, who was also helping us moderate, wave Nancy, Caroline and I were part of the Green Acres program, and we and another section from Green Acres were pulled into this new office called Transactions and Public Land Administration. The purpose of the reorganization was to centralize certain functions within the department, including legal review of contracts and grants, which is not what we're here to talk about today, and legal oversight of both DEP-owned land and preserved land in which the department has an interest, such as Green Acres and Cumbert Parkland. I'm just going to go over this organizational chart kind of quickly. It's a little hard to read, but in the center, in kind of the pale orange color, what some of you may have known as the former Bureau of Legal Services and Stewardship in the Green Acres program is now the Public Land Compliance section within the Office of Transactions and Public Land Administration. That's the center part of this chart, and that's actually the section that's most directly responsible for the parts of the rules that we're talking about today. And Nancy Lawrence is the manager of that section. Over on the left, where it says Public Land Administration, some of you may know that section as having been the Office of Leases and Concessions that was formerly in the Office of the Assistant Commissioner for Natural and Historic Resources. That assistant commissionership no longer exists, and the Public Land Administration section is headed by Adria Wenzel. Over on the right, in the kind of pale purple color, is what we now know as our Legal and Transactional Operations section. This is essentially the Green Acres closing team, headed by Lauren Persida, and consists mostly of the paralegals who help us handle our state real estate closings. And up top, our new office is headed by Rob Guzek as director, and as Caroline mentioned, I'm the assistant director. So again, this office was intended to bring a lot of functions related to administration of both the department's own land and other publicly preserved land into one place to ensure consistency of decision making, and to hopefully over time improve the efficiency in how we respond to requests to use properties both DEP owned and locally owned. So for purposes of our upcoming rulemaking, our rulemaking team is Rob Guzek, our director, myself, Nancy Lawrence, and Caroline Keefe, our regulatory officer. So what we're here to talk about today is what right now is part of the Green Acres rules. And for those of you who joined us a little later, there is a link to the existing rules in the chat box. And we also provided a link to a hot topics document and the email address for our office. So right now, within the Green Acres rules, subchapters 25 and 26 apply to post-funding compliance requirements. The rest of the Green Acres rules applies to the funding process, the process of obtaining funding, which is not what we're here to talk about today. Subchapter 25 right now outlines what our expectations are as far as managing property if you take Green Acres funding to acquire or develop it. These rules apply both to directly funded parkland and to what we call unfunded parkland, which are the parks that are listed on recreation and open space inventories as a condition of taking Green Acres funding. Right now, subchapter 26 is primarily what people know as our diversion application process. So for those occasions where someone wants to request that we lift the Green Acres restriction from a park, subchapter 26 has a pretty detailed process for how that request can be made. We last made substantive changes to these rules in 2005. And those of you who have attended either the State Land Trust Conference or other presentations that we've given the last couple of years have been hearing us say for a long time that we intended to update the rules. So that time is now. But with the new reorganization, we're going to pull subchapters 25 and 26 out of the Green Acres rules and put them in a new chapter specific to the new office. There may be other topics that we end up covering in those rules as well, pertaining to state property and other things not relevant to today. So we're here today, as I said, not to talk about how you can obtain Green Acres funding and what the process is for funding, but to talk about what happens, as I like to put it, after you have the ribbon cutting and hand out the big fake check, and Martha Sapp's office then hands the file to Nancy and says, here, we did this great project and you need to keep track of it for all time to make sure that the property we help buy or develop stays as parkland. So we're here today to listen to those of you who have had experience with our post-funding requirements, talk about what you like, what you don't like, what you think we should change. I know a little concern has been expressed over the hot topics list that we've distributed. As Caroline mentioned, the topics on that list were intended to spur discussion and don't reflect any policy decisions that we've already made. But to some degree, they do reflect things that we get asked about on a regular basis and think we might have to address in the new rules. Also on that list, I just want to put it out there right up front that there was some reaction early on in our stakeholdering process to the fact that we listed leases as a topic for discussion. So right now we do review leases for Green Acres funded parkland and for unfunded parkland. And we wanted feedback on that review process, whether it's too difficult, whether there's other things we should be considering. But it was not intended to be a prompt that we are considering wholesale commercialization of local parks, which was an interpretation that some people made. So I just want to put that concern to rest if I possibly can. Let's see. So as Caroline mentioned, I think we don't have a huge number of people on the call. We probably don't have to limit comments to 3 minutes. We're here for the full 2 hours, and we can extend the time for up to an hour if necessary. And you're free to make whatever comments you want on the record, suggestions, questions. We'll answer what we can. If there are topics you don't want to bring up in this session, but want to put before us, you're welcome to send an email to that address at the bottom of the slide, otpla@dep.nj.gov. And some people have asked about kind of what the deadline is for comments. I've been telling people we have one more stakeholder meeting next week in the evening. After that, we're going to spend some time reviewing the comments that we did receive. I think any comments we get through, certainly through the middle of February and probably a little bit past that, we will take into account as part of our rule drafting process. As I said, we have one more stakeholder meeting next week. It's on the 31st at 6 o'clock. The recordings of the prior stakeholder meetings are on our website under our public notices page, and you're welcome to look at those as well. So I think at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Nancy and Caroline for them to determine the order of comments. And I think you can either use the raise your hand function, or you can let us know in the chat that you'd like to speak, and we'll try to take you in order.
Yeah, I put to put your name in the chat, but I think we have a small enough group, we can just do raise your hand too.
So Eileen, I'm going to put you on the spot because you joined us earlier this week. I don't know if you have joined us again to comment on additional topics or whether there's anything you'd like to say for the record.
No, thank you. I wanted to listen in, and since I'm here just to advocate for the development of forest stewardship plans and the use of Green Acres funding for that purpose, for the development and implementation of forest stewardship plans on forested lands that have been acquired using Green Acres funding.
And you mentioned earlier in the week, Eileen, that you're part of the task force that Senator Smith convened, I think, and you indicated that the report of the task force would be forthcoming soon, but it's going to the senator first, right? At that point, will it be released to the public? Do you know?
Yeah, so we're briefing the senator within the next couple of weeks, and then shortly after the briefing comes first, and then it will be made available to the general public and to DEP, obviously.
Okay, well, that timing would probably work well for what we're doing here. So
yeah. So there's some good recommendations in there. So,
but I would assume those recommendations would have to be implemented through potentially a combination of legislation, rulemaking by the department, or some other process by forestry, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. For those of you who weren't with us on Tuesday, we mentioned then that a hot topic has been forestry and forest stewardship plans, and there's different perceptions sometimes of what those plans are supposed to accomplish. So we've been hearing a lot about forestry, and Eileen, who's with New Jersey Audubon, is part of a task force convened by Senator Smith to examine how those plans are developed and approved. So we're eagerly awaiting the results of the review so we can see how it meshes with the concerns we're hearing.
Yeah, so we're actually going to request a briefing to DEP. So we have John Cecil is our formal liaison between the department and the task force. So hopefully he can convene a group of DEP leaders who who touch upon forestry matters at the agency, and we can just go over the entire report with those people.
Okay, we'll keep our ears open for that one. I see we have a couple of representatives from the city of Bayonne. I don't know if you have particular comments you'd like to put on the record. I know you have had some involvement in the past with our diversion process.
Yeah, Judith, this is John Armstrong from Bayonne, engineer for Bayonne. I was just actually writing an email. I joined in this meeting just to get an early view. My intention is to join in the meeting on July the 31st, but unfortunately I have to leave now because I've got about 9 minutes to get to another meeting. So I didn't want to make you think I'm not entirely interested. We're enormously interested in this meeting, but if you could just tolerate my absence until the January the 31st, that would be good.
That's perfectly fine. That's
okay.
Perfectly fine.
I just joined in this meeting just to get an early view, but I knew I had this conflict. I just thought while I was waiting for this other meeting, I thought I'd just listen in, see what was happening. But I do have to leave now.
I think actually there's a couple of other Bayonne officials on
on
the call. So
there
I didn't actually even realize that was your affiliation.
Yeah, we've got Mr. Skillender there from Bayonne, and he's there, and I think Jay Coffey's there as well, isn't he, somewhere, Joe?
Yes, it appears so.
Yeah. Okay, Judith, I have to leave, but I'll see you again.
Okay, we'll see you next week
on January the 31st at 6 p.m. Thanks very much, by the way. It's very interesting so far. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay.
So
Bye-bye.
I do see that Lindsay Sigmund wants to speak, but I'll let the Bayonne officials go first if they do want to comment. Don't feel like you have to.
Just Jay Coffey. I'm the law director for the city. This is, again, we're going to have more people, I think, on the January 31st or this evening. There's a call this evening too, I believe, right?
Not with us. It might be something else.
Okay. So we will be on the January 31st.
Okay.
Also, I think a more complete group. But this is fabulous. You know, our experience at DEP has been great for the past 8 years. David's administration, Joe Skillender's an assistant city attorney, so monitoring all this stuff. Also, I think you're gonna have more people on the January 31st call.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Right.
Okay. Would Lindsay Sigmund like to comment?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Hi. So Lindsay Sigmund with New Jersey Future. I oversee our mainstreaming green infrastructure program. My apologies for not having too much background, but I did see the announcement for this meeting in the Environmental Justice newsletter just the other day. So I haven't had too much time to look closely at the resources available, but I believe that stormwater management would be under the purview of these articles that are under discussion. I see you nodding your head. So
on our hot topics list, I believe we have green infrastructure and stormwater listed, and we have had prior conversation with New Jersey Future and Jersey Waterworks about that topic. So.
Okay, great. Yeah, there was a Jersey Waterworks subcommittee dedicated making comments. So that's great to know that that's potentially a part of this rule change, because the current interpretation for existing parks has restricted in-park management of off-site stormwater runoff using gray, but green infrastructure could be used as a stormwater management technique going forward. So I just didn't know if there was anything to review at this time that would address stormwater and specifically the use of green infrastructure. And in addition, also interested in gray infrastructure in the framework of, the opportunity to design recreation amenities in a way that captures stormwater. For example, the city of Hoboken has designed certain parks in this way, sunken fields, courts with stormwater management systems beneath, as long as no recreation space is lost. So I was just curious if there's anything to review now, or I think you were starting to share when some language would be available to review, because, still interested as an organization in, providing recommendations and feedback on the stormwater management piece. So would appreciate, any information.
So a couple of things. There is a distinction between designing a park with resiliency features built in and retrofitting a park with stormwater, underground stormwater basins or other things for flood control or water quality protection. And so we don't necessarily have a problem with a new park that's designed to incorporate those features, but when projects come up that affect existing parks, we get a little more involved in the review. And I think we do have the intention of both specifying to the extent we can what green infrastructure features are okay on parks in our experience, but also kind of what the parameters would be for placing these facilities in existing parks and striking a balance between stormwater control, water quality control, and recreational use of the park. I know there's often a perception that you could put a basin under the entire park and not affect what's going on the surface, but it does to some degree limit what can then be done on the surface. And we're trying to figure out what the tipping point should be on that. And, ironically, I think Bayonne has some experience with that. So we did allow that in a park in Bayonne, but we did take a pretty careful look at what they were doing. So so we're definitely interested in being more specific in the rules about kind of what is and is not allowed. As far as review of language, I can anticipate. So once we propose this new rule, it's a somewhat formal process that goes in the New Jersey Register, and there's a defined way to comment, and our ability to really tweak things at that point is kind of limited. I'm not promising this, but I can anticipate that on certain subjects, once we decide what we want to say, that we might reach out to subject matter experts and say, hey, do you think this is workable? I think we will have the opportunity to do some of that. We're going to have to consult our management about how they want to handle that, but I would like to try to do that if we can. So, and I think, I can't remember specific names of who was involved at the time right now, but there was a white paper floating around that Jersey Waterworks was working on that we will certainly pull up, see if there's anything in there that we want to incorporate. And you just might want to talk to people there about kind of what they might want us to say. You're welcome to drop us a comment and say, I think the rule should say this specifically. So that's all fair game right now.
Okay, yeah. Would it be helpful to resend any of those resources, or do you?
I don't think so. The person who was kind of our point person besides me, I don't think is on the phone this second, but we have all that information from prior conversations. I don't think you need to resend any of it. So that's probably where I'm going to start when I get to that particular subject. Is I'm going to look at that. It was a draft. It wasn't finalized, but there was a draft white paper where suggestions were being made to us about what shouldn't be allowed on parks. So that's probably where we'll start with our thinking.
Great. Yeah. So the program has changed a little bit. Some people have left, but I'd be the point person at New Jersey Future, and we provide the support for that Jersey Waterworks committee. So I could happy my email in the chat or reach out to you just to keep the line of communication going, and just really appreciate the time and allowing me to speak today and for the update.
Yeah, if you want to just drop an email to that general address at the bottom of that slide to say, you know, you're the point person for both New Jersey Future and Jersey Waterworks and would be happy to talk to us about these issues. We'll then gather that into our folder of comments and then we'll remember when the time comes. That would be helpful.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you. Yes, go ahead, Mr. Skillender.
Hi, yeah, just kind of reiterating some of the comments, that were being made about, Bayonne's participation in this, and, we are, very interested in, seeing some of those proposed regulations in regards to, potential basin capture and stormwater management. Bayonne specifically, being a little self-interested here in this, we are the largest by number of outflows, the CSO community. And, the park, mentioned Fitzpatrick Park, I think, is a model for, the state to look at of, how to kind of balance, the mission of, Green Acres, but then also, handle stormwater management. I mean, the park was, we'll speak more to this on the 31st, but, was underutilized, and now with all the renovations, and improvements made to it, kids, and people just walking by, just stop and, get to really enjoy it. But yet, had a practical impact in one of the hurricanes where, with that basin actually solved a major flooding problem in the area that would have affected, local businesses and homeowners, from, rainwater that, flooded certain areas of the city. Around the Fitzpatrick Park, none of the adjacent property owners in the neighborhood flooded from there. So, we're kind of interested to see these rules and hopefully advocate to allow for more of that.
Interesting to hear that. I wasn't aware whether the project was complete or not, but that's really interesting to hear.
Yes,
yeah, I mean,
completed. Sorry. Yeah, no, the project's completed. We've had, actually several, awards, awarded on the project for the innovation of incorporating, use of space for the, roller rink that's built, the design layout of it, of kind of incorporating some of Bayonne's past history, where we have an old a clock tower now there with the church bells from a church that was no longer in use and was repurposed for the city's enjoyment. And every hour on the hour, you hear them ring throughout the city. So it's kind of a shining example that we like. And if allowed, we would like to continue this for some of the other parks that we have. But again, it's obviously that's kind of our interest here, and we'll have some more people that will talk about this on the 31st.
So just a couple of general comments. So our guiding principle in giving out Green Acres money and then checking up on the parks afterwards is that the money has to be used for recreation and conservation purposes. So green infrastructure, I'm not sure anybody even thought of that back in the 60s, is not specifically mentioned in our definition. Flood control is not part of our definition, but watershed protection is. And certainly in urban areas and in places like Bayonne, where you have combined sewer overflow issues as well as flooding issues, it hasn't been that difficult for us to say that these projects are watershed protection projects. But I just want people to understand that that's the framework within which we have to operate, because flood control for the sake of flood control, for the sake of protecting private property next to a park, is kind of a non-starter for us. But if it can be cast in a watershed protection context, then it's not inappropriate for a park, as long as we then just make sure that it doesn't render the park unusable or interfere with, specific plans that people had when they purchased the park in the first place. So we are trying to strike that balance, and I'm glad to hear that the project actually worked in Bayonne. So, and I would think that on the basis that we approve that project, we'd be able to approve more, but it is going to be somewhat site specific. And I think we said that at the time, you know, it's really going to be a matter of kind of the lay of the land and what are you trying to accomplish and what are you potentially not going to be able to do on the park once you build this project. So, but thank you. That's really helpful.
If I can, this is Jay Coffey for the City of Bayonne. I'm the old man in the group, having grown up in Bayonne, and Fitzpatrick Park is, you know, knowing what's underneath it and what it's doing for the water situation. Only a limited number of people know about it. The people within City Hall and maybe a couple of others. The use of the park compared to what it was 10 years ago, certainly 30 years ago, is off the charts. I mean, the design of it to maximize use is something to behold. The implementation of putting the tank underneath it did nothing to affect the use. I just sit there smiling, seeing so many people use it during the day. We're right across the street at City Hall. I want to go to lunch. When I go to the bank, I see people in there. It's used more now than it ever has. And nobody knows about the ancillary service that it provides with respect to the water issue. But I'm sure we can recreate this type of park in Bayonne, several places. I know, understand it's site specific, but there's no shortage of place in Bayonne where this could be effectuated.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And yeah, it's interesting to hear you say about the park being used more than before. I realize it was not in the best shape before it was rehabilitated, but one of our concerns was that I think there were restrooms and now there aren't, but you know, that it's such a small park. I think you were able to revamp it in a way that's probably more useful than what was there. So, okay, would anyone else like to speak right now?
I guess just to clarify, that includes everybody, whether you're calling in or if you have access or not. I see Nancy said 2 people on the phone.
Yes, thank you. Those of you on the phone would not be able to raise your hand in Teams. So if there's anyone who called into the meeting who'd like to speak, you can just unmute yourself and make your comments. Okay, I think as far as the due date to submit written comments, so we have one more meeting next week. At that point, I think we're going to take a very brief breather. We're going to gather all the comments together that we have and try to organize them. Really, I think anything that you send to us during the month of February, it would not be too late for us to put it in the pile of comments we're reviewing. And it's going to take a while to draft this new chapter. You know, we've done a little bit of thinking about how we might reorganize the rule, but with the variety of topics that we realize we have to give more guidance on, this is not going to be a short drafting exercise. So I believe our management would like us to propose and adopt a rule by the end of the calendar year. I think that's probably a little too ambitious because of the formal process that we have to go through once we formally propose the rule. But I can see that certainly we might propose something by the fall. So really anything I think we get during the month of February would be pretty easy for us to take into account. And I think we're still going to be engaged in drafting the rule for a couple of months after that. You're welcome, Eileen. Okay, I think we might do what we did on Tuesday when we ran out of commenters. Well, we did two things. We went over the hot topics list, but I'm not sure that ended up spurring much discussion. If there's things on there that people want to ask about, they can. But what we did on Tuesday, as Caroline mentioned, we have advertised this meeting for 2 hours, and we don't want to prejudice anyone who might come late to the meeting. So we stopped the recording, but Caroline and I stayed on the line until the 2 hours were over, so that if anybody dropped in, we could reopen the record. So certainly anyone who's commented already, or who was here just to listen, you don't have to feel like you have to stick around. And if we get additional comments during this session, we will record them and we will post them on the website as part of the recording of this part of the meeting. We'll stitch everything together. So I'll give kind of a last call for comments, but if there aren't any, I think we'll stop the recording and we'll kind of go into a holding pattern to see if anyone else joins us.
This is Jay Coffey. I just want to thank you very much for having this, and I'll see you again on the 31st.
Thank you. We appreciate it. And thank you for that link to the article about Bayonne. We'll take a look at that.
You're welcome. And thank you again for your time.
You're welcome. Thanks for joining us. Okay, it's 1:40. We're going to stop recording, but as I said, we're going to stay on the line until 3 in case there's any late comments.